She pushed me. It wasn't a stumble, nor an accidental slip. It was a calculated, sharp gesture that sent me backward, nearly making me fall in front of everyone. The silence that followed was as heavy as the impact on my back. I looked at my son, searching in him for some reflection of outrage, of protection, of love. But he merely averted his gaze, as if that scene had nothing to do with him. There, in the center of my own living room, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I was alone. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I'm 64 years old, and for more than 3 decades I worked as a teacher in a public school in Boston. I saw generations of students grow up, counseled young people who had no one to listen to their fears, devoted myself to lives that weren't mine, believing that when my time came, my family would do the same for me. But that's not what happened. My daughter-in-law Claire's aggression was only the visible tip of a chain of small acts of disrespect that had been piling up. It started with impatient looks when I took too long to finish a sentence, then subtle comments about how maybe it was time to think about a nursing home, and cruel jokes disguised as concern for my memory. I pretended not to hear, because part of me believed that family peace was worth more than my dignity. That day, however, the mask fell. Claire didn't see me as a mother-in-law. She didn't see me as the mother of the man she claimed to love. To her, I was an obstacle, and the empty look in my son's eyes only confirmed what my heart feared. Maybe he thought the same. The house we were in, the home where I raised my children, was my greatest asset. Every wall held stories. The childhood drawings taped to the fridge, the sound of laughter during Christmases, the long conversations at the table when my husband, Richard, was still alive. But to them, it all seemed reduced to nothing more than a piece of real estate, a key to a comfortable life they hadn't built. I didn't yet know the full extent of what was to come. I only knew that, in that moment, something broke inside me, and like shattered glass, there was no way to go back to what it once was. After the shove, I retreated to my bedroom, pretending I needed to rest. I closed the door gently, not to avoid noise, but to hide the fragility that had taken hold of me. The tears came silently, hot, burning not only my skin but also my memory. I relived every sacrifice, every sleepless night grading papers, every dollar saved to pay for David's college, my only son, the same one who now wouldn't stand up to defend me. As I wiped my eyes, an old memory surfaced, the first time Richard brought me to this house. "Here, Maggie, is where we'll build everything," he said, smiling with that youthful enthusiasm he never lost. And we did build it. Walls, family, dreams. But he left too soon, and I was left with the mission of sustaining it all alone. Now, it seemed even that inheritance of love was being fought over as if it were a trophy. When I left the bedroom, I heard muffled laughter coming from the living room. Claire was speaking softly, but I caught a phrase that froze me. "She won't last much longer. After that, this house is ours." My heart raced. The words were spoken as casually as someone commenting on a change of season, cold and inevitable. And David, he didn't contest it. He simply let his silence serve as a kind of agreement. That was the moment the truth sank in. It wasn't just disrespect. It wasn't just mean little jokes. There was a plan underway, alive and conscious. I was already being treated as someone whose end had been predetermined. I didn't yet have concrete proof, but I had a visceral, almost instinctive feeling. Something was being plotted against me, and if I did nothing, I wouldn't just lose my dignity. I would also lose the only thing that still connected me to Richard and to my own past. This house. That night, as I lay down, I whispered silently to myself, "Never again. Never again would I be pushed without fighting back. Never again would I let the distorted love of a son make me accept humiliation." I didn't know how yet, but something inside me began to change. The days that followed were a series of small signs I could no longer ignore. One morning, I found a folder of documents left on the kitchen table. It was open, as if someone had hurriedly forgotten it. My heart raced when I saw, among letter-headed papers and forms, the name of my house written in bold letters. It was a real estate appraisal, with the property's address and market value. The folder also contained a draft of a property transfer contract. My name was there, but not as an active party. I appeared only as the transferor, as if the decision had already been made. The buyer, from what I could gather, was someone Claire knew, someone connected to the real estate business. My blood ran cold. They weren't just dreaming about the house. They were preparing to sell it. My first impulse was to confront them immediately, but something held me back. If I exploded without enough evidence, I would be labeled hysterical, a paranoid old woman. So, I took a deep breath and closed the folder exactly as it was, locking the information inside myself. For the first time, I realized I would have to play their game, silently, watching every step. That night, I again overheard fragments of conversation. Claire, impatient, whispered, "We need to speed this up. What if she changes her mind?" "She won't change, Claire," David replied, in a cold tone I barely recognized. "She has nowhere to go." I stood frozen behind the door, motionless, feeling the weight of those words crush me. My own son believed I had no way out, that I was too weak to fight back. What he didn't know was that very night, something had ignited inside me. A small flame, but real. I didn't yet know what my next step would be, but I was already certain of one thing. If they were ready to erase me from the story of my own life, then I was ready to write a new chapter, and it would be me, not them, who decided the ending. The following weekend, Claire announced she was hosting a special dinner. She said she wanted to celebrate the new phase of the family. Her words were accompanied by a smile that never reached her eyes. I accepted the invitation without protest, feigning naivety, but inside, every muscle in my body was on alert. During dinner, I watched how she dominated the conversation, talking about trips she planned to take, about the renovations she envisioned for the house, as if everything had already been decided. I chewed in silence, letting every sentence be etched into my memory as evidence. The pinnacle came when David finally raised his glass and said, "To our future, to the house that will now be the home of our children." It was like a stab. He didn't say my mother. He didn't say our family. He said the house. And in that toast, my presence was erased as if I no longer existed. Later, while clearing the plates, I heard Claire on the phone, laughing. "It's almost settled. The paperwork will be ready in a few weeks." She didn't see me standing in the hallway, holding the serving dish with trembling hands. The plate slipped and shattered on the floor, scattering bright shards across the tiles. Claire pretended to show concern, but the look of impatience betrayed her true emotion, irritation that I was still there. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I knew I needed help. Alone, I wouldn't have the strength to face such a carefully laid-out plan. That was when I decided to reach out to someone I had always trusted, Michael Harris, a longtime friend and a respected lawyer in the community. He had defended me in small legal matters in the past, and I knew that if anyone could guide me, it would be him. The next morning, with the folder of documents carefully hidden in my purse, I called to schedule a meeting. For the first time in a long while, I felt that I was no longer just reacting. I was about to act. The afternoon I met Michael. My body trembled even before I stepped into his office. The walls lined with bookshelves, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and the firmness of his handshake returned to me something I had lost, the feeling of being on solid ground. "Maggie, you look exhausted." "What happened?" he asked, with that attentive gaze that always seemed to cut through any mask. I took a deep breath and handed him the folder I had found. His eyebrows rose as he flipped through the pages. His silence cut me deeper than any word. Finally, he closed the file and said, "This is serious. It's not just a suspicion, it's a clear preparation for a property transfer. And the most alarming part, your name appears as transferor, but there's no signature, which means someone intends to forge it or coerce you into signing. I felt the ground tremble. The possibility of forgery had never crossed my mind, but it made sense. Claire wouldn't hesitate to manipulate whatever she needed. Michael explained that, legally, the house had been entirely mine since Richard's death. I owed nothing to anyone, but he also warned, if I remained passive, I ran the risk of being tricked through emotional pressure, or worse, finding falsified documents in my name. They believe you are alone. That's what makes them bold. He placed his hand over mine. But you're not. If you want, I can handle this. At that moment, I felt something shift in my chest. The pain of betrayal still throbbed, but now there was a spark of strength. I was no longer waiting to be crushed by events. I had an ally, and that changed everything. I decided to test the waters that very week. I waited until Wednesday's dinner, when Claire insisted on serving wine and discussing family plans. The conversation inevitably drifted toward the house. "You know, Maggie," she said in her syrupy voice, "it doesn't make sense for you to carry such a burden. You deserve to rest, to enjoy what's left of your life without worries." David, sitting beside her, nodded but didn't dare look at me. I watched every detail. The way he fidgeted with the napkin, how he avoided my eyes. Then Claire let slip, almost as if by accident, "The paperwork is nearly ready. We just need your signature, and everything will be much easier." My breath caught for a second. She didn't know I had already seen those documents. I feigned confusion. "What paperwork?" I asked calmly. She tried to brush it off, laughing. "Oh, nothing important, just bureaucratic stuff." "You don't need to worry." David shifted in his chair, and that was the moment I realized he was torn. His silence was complicit, but his posture betrayed discomfort. The conversation ended there, but inside me something broke for good. The shove, the whispered words, the hidden contract, everything now connected in a web of betrayal. I could no longer pretend. They were trying to rip me away from the place Richard and I had built with so much sacrifice. That night, facing the mirror, I stared at my own reflection with a mix of pain and determination. For the first time in years, I didn't just see the lonely, tired widow. I saw a woman who had raised a son, sustained a household, and survived the cruelest loss. I was not weak, I was not disposable, and I murmured softly, as a promise to myself, never again. The morning after the dinner, I woke up different. It wasn't a light awakening, the kind where hope pushes you out of bed. It was a heavy, burdened awakening, yet firm. I knew I had crossed a point of no return. I could no longer deny that my son and daughter-in-law were plotting against me. They didn't just want the house. They wanted my identity erased. They wanted to reduce me to a burden, someone without a voice, a shadow that only got in the way of the brilliant future they planned to live. I made coffee as always, but every detail of that routine now felt like a symbol. The kettle whistling was like a reminder of the time I had allowed to slip through my fingers. The table set for just one person was the living portrait of the loneliness I had avoided facing. With each sip, I thought of Richard. He would never have allowed anyone to treat me like this. I wondered if, from somewhere, he was watching me, and if he was disappointed that I had let things get this far. I did not cry that morning. For the first time in a long while, I didn't cry. Instead, I wrote. I picked up an old notebook with a blue cover, where I used to jot down recipes and quotes from books, and began recording everything. Dates, words spoken, gestures, details of conversations. Michael had advised me to gather evidence, and I took that seriously. If they wanted to treat me as invisible, I would make sure every act was recorded, like an inventory of cruelty. In the weeks that followed, I began to observe with almost clinical precision. When Claire hinted that I was forgetting things, I smiled and pretended to agree. But inside, I wrote in the notebook, March 14th, 7 p.m. Comment on mental incapacity. When David averted his eyes instead of defending me, I didn't press for dialogue. I simply wrote, Silent witness. That notebook became my secret weapon, my shield. At the same time, I began taking care of myself in a new way. I reorganized my routine. Morning walks in the park, up-to-date medical appointments, even therapy sessions I had postponed out of shame. I discovered, to my surprise, that there was still strength in my muscles, that there was still life pulsing through my veins. And with each step, one phrase repeated in my mind like a mantra, never again. I also returned to attending the local church, not so much out of dogmatic faith, but for the community. I sat among neighbors who had always treated me with kindness and, for the first time, let fragments of my situation slip out. People listened attentively, and some even shared similar stories. Ungrateful children, manipulative daughters-in-law, inheritances fought over as if love could be measured in bricks. That exchange gave me perspective. I wasn't an isolated case. I was part of a silent chain of mothers and widows carrying invisible scars. A lady named Evelyn, her white hair impeccably tied in a bun, held my hand and said, "They only have the power you give them, dear. Don't hand them the key to your dignity." Those words echoed in me more than any sermon. I realized that my battle wasn't just against Claire or David's moral weakness. My battle was against the version of myself that believed I didn't deserve respect. That very day, I scheduled another meeting with Michael. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to plan. At that meeting with Michael, I realized something inside me had already changed. I didn't walk into his office like the shrunken woman who weeks before had only sought comfort. I walked in tall, with steady steps, carrying not just my blue notebook, but also the decision to fight. He noticed it right away. "You're different today, Maggie," he remarked, after offering me a cup of tea. "You look more prepared." "I am," I replied, opening the notebook before him. Here are the notes. Everything I heard, every detail from the past weeks. He leafed through the pages attentively, murmuring, "Good, very useful. This could be decisive." When he finally lifted his eyes to mine, there was a mixture of respect and seriousness. "You did exactly what I needed. This gives us substance. It's not just your word against theirs anymore. Now we have a record." As he spoke about possible legal measures, I caught my reflection in the window glass behind him. The face was still the same, marked by wrinkles and years of weariness, but the eyes were different. There was a spark in them I hadn't seen since the days when I fought to keep the school running on a reduced budget and classrooms full of lost teenagers. I was back. Michael suggested we remain discreet. If I confronted David and Claire too soon, they might destroy evidence or move forward with some sort of scheme. He explained the possibility of filing a preventive declaration at the registry office, ensuring that no sale of the house could be validated without my personal presence and notarized signature. That brought me immediate relief. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a disputed territory, but rather a protected fortress. "But that's just the foundation, Maggie," he said. "You also need to think about what you want from here on. It's not enough to prevent them from taking something from you. It's time to reclaim what they've already tried to steal, your dignity." I left his office with that phrase hammering in my mind, and I began to act. The next day, I got a haircut, nothing drastic, just trimming the damaged ends and asking them to let my natural silver strands shine. It was symbolic, but powerful. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who no longer hid who she was. Age wasn't a burden. It was testimony. I also bought new clothes, simple but elegant, not to impress Claire or David, but for myself. Each time I dressed, I felt I was putting on new armor. Even the way I walked changed. I no longer shuffled through the hallways with lowered head. My steps echoed firm, as if to say, "I'm still here." Claire noticed. The first time she saw me in a new dress, she arched her eyebrows and commented with irony, "I see someone decided to dress up." I smiled calmly. Sometimes it's good to remember who we are. She didn't reply, but I saw the discomfort in her eyes. For the first time, the one who felt out of place in that house was her. That same weekend, I attended a community church event. Volunteers gathered to raise funds for families in need. I had always avoided exposing myself in such activities since Richard's death, but this time I agreed to help organize, and it was transformative. I received hugs, smiles, and heard people call me by name with genuine affection. I wasn't the inconvenient mother-in-law or the lonely widow there. I was simply Maggie, someone who still had much to offer. I came home late that night, and as I stepped into the living room, I found David and Claire arguing in low voices. They stopped when they saw me. I just smiled, walked into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and went upstairs without saying a word. But inside, I knew they were beginning to realize that the woman they believed they could bring down was no longer the same. The weeks that followed felt like a kind of silent rebirth. I woke early, had my coffee without hurry, and walked through the neighborhood as if exploring new territory, even though it was the same path, the same trees, the same shops. The world seemed more alive because, for the first time in a long while, I too felt alive. I kept writing in my blue notebook, but now not just recording offenses or manipulations. I also wrote down small victories. Today, I didn't tremble when answering Claire. Today, David tried to avoid me, but I held his gaze until he looked away. Today, I felt pride again when I saw my reflection in the mirror. This daily record became almost like therapy, a parallel narrative reminding me that change wasn't abstract. It was happening before my eyes. Claire, increasingly irritated by my firm stance, began to be less careful. Her provocations became more open. She would comment about old people who don't know when to stop while we sat at the table, or complain loudly about how hard it was to live in a house that isn't really ours. I just wrote it down, calmly, without retaliating. Silence became my greatest weapon because it made clear I no longer fell into her trap. During this period, I grew closer to Evelyn, the lady who had comforted me at church. She invited me over for tea one cold Saturday afternoon. We talked for hours, and I realized her life too had been marked by family betrayal. Her son had tried to sell the land that belonged to her late husband, claiming he needed the money more than she did. Evelyn resisted, and with firmness she reclaimed not only her property, but also her peace. The pain of being betrayed by those we love never disappears, she told me, looking into my eyes. But we learn that survival isn't about forgetting. It's about transforming. Those words engraved themselves in me. I felt that Evelyn wasn't just a new friend, but a reflection of what I could become. A woman who, despite loneliness and wounds, still stood tall. With her support and Michael's, I realized I was no longer alone. There was a network around me, even if small, that sustained me. And every gesture of support was like another brick in the wall I was building against Claire's manipulation and David's cowardice. One night, while organizing my notes to hand over to Michael, I laid my hand on the living room wall and felt the cold of the paint. I imagined the day Richard had painted it white, laughing at how much he spilled on the carpet. Those memories filled me with strength. The house wasn't just a building. It was part of my story, and I would not let it be torn from me as if it were disposable. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was just reacting to the harm being done to me. I was building the path to my own victory. Michael called me early on a Monday morning. His voice was firm, almost solemn. "Maggie, we need to move quickly. I've learned that they're trying to push up the signing of the sales contract. We don't have much time." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I had already suspected Claire wouldn't waste time, but hearing the confirmation made me realize the battle was about to escalate. We met that very afternoon. He explained that he had already filed preventive measures to block any attempt to sell the house without my notarized signature. That brought me some relief, but it also heightened the need to act with intelligence. "They'll try to pressure you," he warned, "most likely by using emotional arguments. You need to be ready to resist." I went home resolved. Claire didn't waste time attacking. That night, she barged into my room without knocking, as if she owned the place. "Maggie, you need to understand that holding on to this house only delays everyone's life. Think of the grandchildren you don't even have yet. Think of the family's future." I smiled calmly, surprising even myself. "Claire, my future doesn't depend on anyone's hurry, least of all yours." She huffed and left, slamming the door. In that moment, I realized my transformation wasn't just internal anymore. Now it was visible. Even my tone of voice revealed that I was no longer the same woman who had once cried alone behind a door weeks earlier. The next day, I took the transformation to a new level. I started visiting a community gym where seniors did light exercises. I didn't care that I no longer had the vitality I once did. What mattered was proving to myself that I could still occupy the world with strength. With every stretch, every walk on the treadmill, I felt my body gaining not just physical power, but also moral strength. People began to notice. Evelyn remarked, "You carry yourself differently. Even your voice has changed." And I knew it was true. David noticed too. During dinner, he dared to say, "Mom, you seem different." I looked him straight in the eye and answered, "Maybe I finally remembered who I am." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any argument. For the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes, perhaps a spark of guilt, perhaps fear. I was ready. The time for confrontation was approaching, and when it came, I would no longer be just the betrayed mother or the silent widow. I would be the woman who would never again allow her story to be stolen. The tension reached its peak on a rainy Friday. Claire walked into the house accompanied by a man I had never seen before. A realtor, it seemed, with a black folder under his arm and that artificial smile of someone who only sees dollar signs. David followed in silence, his shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight he didn't dare confess. "Maggie," Claire said, with the sweet voice she only used when she wanted to deceive me. "This is Mr. Thompson. He's here to help us with a few formalities." Formalities. The word echoed like a gunshot inside me. I knew exactly what this was about. I feigned ignorance, inviting them to sit in the living room. The realtor opened his folder and began explaining as if I were a mere extra in my own home. "Just a signature here, Mrs. Sullivan, and everything will be settled." My heart pounded, but I was no longer the woman who yielded to fear. I stood up calmly, walked to the shelf, and pulled down the blue notebook. I placed it on the table, opening it to the first page. "Before we talk about signatures, I'd like to share a few notes." Claire rolled her eyes. "Maggie, please, don't make a scene." "A scene?" I smiled, keeping my tone steady. "Here are dates, times, words spoken by you and by David. Every time you called me incapable. Every time you hinted that I was senile. Every time you plotted to take this house." The realtor looked at me in surprise. David lowered his eyes. Claire tried to intervene, but I cut her off. I also documented the contract I found, with my name listed as the transferor. It's already in my lawyer's hands. Silence fell. For the first time, I saw the color drain from Claire's face. The realtor closed his folder and muttered that perhaps it would be better to return another time. He left quickly, abandoning us there. I turned to David. "Son, for weeks I waited for you to stand up. I waited for you to be the man I raised. but you chose to look away." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Claire, furious, stepped forward. "This isn't over. You can't stop us. I already have." My voice came out firm, almost cutting. "Legally, you have no power over this house, and emotionally, you've already lost far more than you realize." The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was the certainty that, at last, the tables had turned. After that confrontation, the house was never the same again. Claire avoided crossing my path, which in itself was already a victory. David walked with his head down, caught between his distorted loyalty to his wife and the heavy conscience of a man who had betrayed his own mother. Days later, I received a call from Michael. "Maggie, the preventive filing has been approved. No one can move a finger regarding your property without you being present. You're protected." I cried silently, but these tears were different, not of weakness, but of relief. For the first time in months, I felt I could breathe without fear of losing everything. The following Sunday, I made a bold decision. I invited some neighbors and church friends over for afternoon tea at my house. It wasn't just a social gathering. It was a statement. I decorated the living room with fresh flowers, baked cakes myself, and opened my home's doors as if to say, "I still belong here. This house is alive because I am alive." Claire appeared midway through the gathering, likely to provoke me. She walked in with her usual air of superiority, but was met with a room full of people embracing me, complimenting the beauty of the house, recognizing me as the rightful owner of that space. I saw the discomfort on her face, the way her posture faltered under so many eyes that weren't hers. One of the neighbors, unaware of the conflict, commented loudly, "Maggie, this house has your soul. It's as welcoming as you are." Claire nearly choked on her coffee. I simply smiled and thanked them. In that moment, I realized that justice wasn't only legal, it was also social, moral. Claire could manipulate documents, but she could never erase the recognition of those around me. David didn't show up, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of cowardice, but in a way, his absence was symbolic. It was as if I had finally stopped waiting for him. I no longer needed him to defend me. I had done that myself. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea. A light rain was still falling, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel cold. The house was silent, but it wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of peace. I knew the battle wasn't entirely over, that Claire might try new tricks. But inside me, something essential had already shifted. I had reclaimed my voice, my strength, my dignity, and I whispered, gazing at the glowing windows, "This house will never be yours again." The weight of victory still felt strange to me. I walked through the house's corridors, and every wall seemed to whisper that I had won a silent yet devastating battle. There was pride in me, yes, but there was also mourning. Because the war I had to wage wasn't against strangers, but against my own son and the woman he chose. The following Monday, I found David sitting in the kitchen. His face was haggard, his eyes sunken. He was no longer the young man full of plans whom I once helped raise. Now, before me, was a man broken by his own choices. "Mom," he began, but his voice faltered. "I don't know what to say." "Then say nothing," I replied, pouring coffee for both of us. "Just listen." I told him everything I felt, every sleepless night, every tear I shed alone, every time I silently begged for him to defend me. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I spoke calmly, like someone reciting an indisputable truth. "You looked away when I needed you to see me most, David. That hurts more than any document signed in secret." He cried. For the first time in a long time, he cried in front of me. He apologized, stammered excuses, said he was confused, that Claire pressured him. But deep down, we both knew none of that changed the fact that he had chosen silence. "I don't know if I can forgive you now," I told him firmly, but I know I will not carry this weight alone. The responsibility is yours too. David nodded, ashamed. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to hug him. It wasn't a time for comfort. It was a time for truth. In the days that followed, Claire scarcely appeared at home. Perhaps out of fear, perhaps by strategy. I didn't care. I had already made it clear the house was mine, and my dignity was no longer negotiable. The air felt lighter, even with the wound still open between David and me. I went back to writing in the blue notebook, but now with a different tone. It was no longer just records of aggression. They were reflections. I wrote about the strength I discovered in myself, about friendships that resurfaced, about the power of looking in the mirror without feeling shame. The notebook had begun as a shield, but was now becoming a testament to rebirth. One night, I dreamed of Richard. He waited for me on the porch, with that serene smile that always calmed me. "You did it, Maggie," he said. "You remembered who you are." I woke with tears in my eyes, but they were sweet tears, like someone finally receiving the blessing they longed for. I knew there were still steps to take, but they were no longer steps of survival. They were steps of reconstruction. I decided I wouldn't live only on silent victories. It was time to take my place in the world again. And that's how I accepted Evelyn's invitation to give a small talk at the church's community group. She wanted me to speak about dignity and resistance. At first, I hesitated. Me, giving a talk? But then I thought, how many women like me are living the same pains in silence? Perhaps my voice could be a spark for others. That Saturday, I wore my best navy blue coat, fixed my silver hair, and walked to the parish hall. There were about 30 people, mostly women with deep wrinkles, eyes marked by stories that were rarely told. When they gave me the floor, my hands trembled, but I took a deep breath and let my heart speak. For months, I felt invisible. I began, as if my age were a certificate of uselessness, as if my worth had expired. I was humiliated, manipulated, and I almost lost the house I built with my husband. But I discovered it's never too late to say enough. Without exposing names, I told how I faced betrayal within my own family. I told how I wrote down every cruel word, how I sought help, how I found my strength again, and I concluded, don't let yourselves be convinced that aging means disappearing. We are still here. We still have a voice. The hall erupted in applause. I saw tears in eyes that carried stories similar to mine. Some women came to hug me. Others simply held my hand in silence, as if to say, thank you for saying what I never managed to say. On the way home, I walked the streets with a new lightness. It wasn't just about protecting the house or confronting Claire and David. It was about reconnecting with my own value and, as a bonus, extending that strength to others. When I stepped through the living room door, I found David sitting there, silent again. This time, he stood and said, I was there. I heard everything. My heart raced. I hadn't known he'd gone. Then you know, I replied simply. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I want to change, Mom. I don't want to be the man you described. I looked at him for a long moment. Part of me still bled, but another part began to believe there might be a path to rebuild something. Not for him. Not for Claire. But for me, because I deserved not to carry only the weight of betrayal, but also the chance for reconciliation. That conversation with David that night opened an unexpected crack in the icy wall that separated us. For days, he started coming home from work earlier, making dinner, or simply sitting with me in the living room in silence, as if seeking a way to rebuild something that had been broken. I let him try, but I kept my heart protected. I knew trust wasn't something regained with a few gestures. It's a long road, made of consistency and true remorse. Claire, on the other hand, reacted poorly. Her hostility grew. She muttered contemptuous phrases as she passed me, made a point of stressing that this house should already be in other hands, and avoided any coexistence beyond the bare minimum. But every time she tried to wound me, I no longer faltered. It was as if her words struck an invisible armor and fell away without effect. One episode marked this new equilibrium. She showed up in the middle of an afternoon with a suitcase in hand and announced, "I'm going to stay with my mother for a few days. I can't stand this atmosphere anymore." David, silently, didn't stop her. He simply watched as she left, slamming the door. When we were alone, he looked at me and said, "Maybe that's for the best." I didn't answer. I just kept arranging the books on the shelf, letting the silence speak for me. Deep down, I knew Claire represented the catalyst of the pain I had lived, but she wasn't the origin of it all. The true root lay in David's choice not to defend me when I needed him most, and that was the wound that still needed to heal. On a rainy night, he finally spoke more clearly. "Mom, I know I destroyed your trust. I saw what you did at the church. I heard every word, and I realized I could have been the son you deserved. I wasn't. I don't know if I can make amends, but I want to try." There was silence. I felt my heart sway between hurt and hope. I took a deep breath and said, "Making amends takes time, David. It isn't about pleasing me with easy gestures. It's about you looking in the mirror and becoming the man your father dreamed you would be." He nodded, crying quietly. In that moment, I realized there might be a chance for redemption, not through the illusion that everything would be as it was before, but through the possibility that something new could be born from the pain. And it was then that I understood the depth of my process. It wasn't just about defeating Claire. It was about finding my voice again and, perhaps, making room for even my son to transform. The following months were a time of reconstruction. Claire never again lived under the same roof as me. Her absence brought an almost tangible peace, as if every room had finally exhaled in relief. The house, once a stage for manipulation and betrayal, became a home again. Not perfect, not untouched, but real, inhabited by the dignity I had reclaimed. David stayed. He became more present, helping with simple chores, accompanying me to appointments, and little by little calling me Mom with tenderness once more. Something I hadn't heard in years. I let him try, without haste, without promises. Reconciliation was possible, but it would be built with bricks of truth, not with empty words. I returned to dedicating myself to the community group. My talks became more frequent, and I realized my story resonated with women who, like me, had been silenced for years. I spoke about dignity, about the importance of not accepting manipulation, about the right to grow old with respect. At each gathering, I felt my pain transform into legacy. One day, a young woman approached me after a meeting. "My mother is going through something similar," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't know how to help her, but now I know I can show her she's not alone." I held her hands and smiled. "Tell her that loneliness is a lie manipulators tell us. There is always someone willing to listen." That night, back on the porch, I sat with my inseparable cup of chamomile tea. The breeze blew softly, carrying the smell of damp earth. I closed my eyes and felt as if Richard were there beside me. Not in flesh and bone, but in the strength he had left me, in the memory of who we were, in the home we had built together. I looked inside the house and saw David setting the table, clumsy but sincere. The pain of the past still existed, but it no longer defined me. I was not the woman shoved in the middle of the living room, invisible, disposable. I was the woman who had turned betrayal into strength, humiliation into dignity, silence into voice, and I wrote in the final entry of the blue notebook, "Never again will I allow anyone to erase who I am. This house, my story, and my dignity will endure. I am Maggie Sullivan, and my legacy is to live standing tall until the very end." I closed the notebook firmly, feeling that it wasn't just a diary. It was the testimony of a phoenix, a woman reborn from her own ashes. And you? Have you ever felt the pain of being betrayed by the one you trusted most? Share your story in the comments. Your voice may be the comfort and strength someone else needs today. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and share it so that more women and men never forget. Dignity is not negotiable.